The Great Depression, stories from my grandmother's life. Stories from my grandmother, the Great Depression. Hello, you all. I'm Diana Brienne, and I woke up this morning thinking about my grandma. Well, as you all know, I have grandma's porch out here, and I call it grandma's porch because, well, growing up, we always sat on grandma's porch. And we discussed the world's problems, our problems, other people's problems, and we seem to always come up with the right solution. So this is Grandma's porch. It's a little chilly out here today, so I'm not sitting out there like normal telling you my stories or chit-chatting. So I got to thinking today about Grandma and the Great Depression. My grandmother and my mother was a small child, lived through the Great Depression of the 1930s. My grandmother came over on what she called a banana boat from the old country, and she was from Europe, and she was a small child, and they had to stay in the steerage department of the ship, kind of all crunched in there together, and there was really only bananas to eat, and they were not good bananas. And so my grandmother used to tell us stories about coming across on that big boat, coming to America, not speaking the language, and how her daddy had to go out and find any kind of job he could. So they settled in kind of a poor country area, coal mine area, and he went to work and he raised his family. My grandmother got married at about age 15 or 16 and had 3 young daughters right away to a man that she was later to divorce, which was a very unusual thing to do in the early 1920s and looked down upon. And so my grandmother had to survive in whatever way she could. And she told the story of the time she made peach brandy, and she was making it at home and selling it so she could feed her little babies because she had gone through a divorce and didn't have a husband. And there was no things like welfare and all that back then. You just had to survive or you didn't. So she was selling this peach brandy, I think it was in the 1920s, and my mother was just a baby, and she got arrested. She got put in jail, and they let my mom as a baby go to jail with her. They wouldn't do that nowadays, but back then they did. And so Grandma was in jail for selling peach brandy in order to survive. Well, then the 1930s came in the Great Depression, and by then Grandma had remarried Grandpa. And they lived in a little tiny house way out in the country, and they were now raising five small children. And times were very, very tough. And in order to survive, Grandpa went to work in the coal mines, and Grandma stretched any dollar, if there was one, that she could. They grew a garden, and they made something from nothing in most cases. Grandma made little baby dolls out of socks, old worn out socks. And I'm going to show you one of them, okay? My grandmother made these for me many, many years ago when I was a child, and I've kept them all along. And so I'm going to show them to you, okay? Here are the little baby dolls, and she made those. And they are made out of socks. I have many things that Grandma made, and I love, love, love them and cherish them. And so Grandma taught me a lot of lessons. She said, you know, you've got to be grateful for what you've got. You've got to work with what you've got. You've got to be respectful and put your focus on your relationships, not on things. And that was Grandma. Grandma did not throw away any money. Grandma was very, very frugal, and she did not allow for waste of any kind. Grandma did not throw away anything. She did not throw away a crust of bread until it was used up. And Grandma even kept her old coffee, and she would drink her old coffee before she would make a new pot. So Grandma was very frugal. She taught my mom how to make homemade noodles just out of flour, salt, and water. And I make those to this very day. They're so inexpensive. And she taught my mom how to make many kinds of meals from nearly nothing. Fried green tomato sandwiches, fried bologna sandwiches, fried cucumber sandwiches, homemade noodles, just all kinds of things. You know, that generation has so much wisdom, and most of them are past now. And my grandmother, I think if she was still alive, would be nearly 120 years old. And my mother has passed too, but she passed me on those stories. And my mother, having grown up in the Great Depression, really was very frugal. She knew how to stretch a dollar. My mother did not throw money away. And so I embrace those traits from my mother and my grandmother. I believe our society today is a throwaway society. They throw away their relationships. They want more, more, more. They demand, they expect, and very little gratitude is shown. Yes, there are people that are grateful. Yes, there are people that work very, very hard and believe in the work ethic. Yes, there are people that value their relationships. And yet, so many people don't because they've not had to live through struggles. And I believe that when people live through struggles, they often connect on a much deeper level with people than they ordinarily would, a more sincere level. And so I believe our society doesn't understand what it's like to live through a Great Depression. Yes, there are some people that have struggled and understand that. I know growing up we were very, very poor, and we had to go to the courthouse steps long before food stamps and get those commodity boxes, which were usually sugar, milk, eggs, flour, and cheese, and maybe a piece of meat. And I remember going up to those courthouse steps at 5 years old, carrying down those boxes with my mom or my brother in order so that we would have something to eat. And we always did, because my mother knew how to make something from nothing. And so our society today, I don't think really has those traits. They really don't know how to do that. They really don't know how to make something from nothing. They really don't have full appreciation of how much they truly have. And so my grandmother never wasted. She was what they would call a hoarder today. But back then it was called a prepper, because they prepared. If they didn't save food, if they didn't put food away or things away, they wouldn't have anything when they needed it. So now today people call it hoarding. I call it prepping. And I believe it's wise to prepare for our future and not throw things away. I believe it's wise to take care of our relationships and not just discard them because they have problems. I believe it's wise to take care of who we are, our health, our finances, our lives. I believe in the work ethic, and I believe in stretching a dollar if needed. And so I think that there's a lot to be learned from the Great Depression, from my grandmother, from that generation. You know, when we begin to think we know it all, or that we know more than the older people, that's when we often run into issues. So I got to really thinking about that. I really got to thinking about my grandmother, the Great Depression, and to appreciate what we have and to take care of what we have. Grandma has taught me so very, very much. From my house to yours, may God bless you, and I hope to talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.